join us on Patreon, and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
The history of African Americans is often traced back to the transatlantic slave trade, a narrative that dominates mainstream historical discourse. However, there exists a deeper, lesser-known history, one that predates the arrival of European settlers on the American continent. The presence of dark-skinned aboriginal tribes in the Americas long before the era of slavery challenges conventional historical perspectives. The notion that African Americans are solely the descendants of enslaved Africans ignores the rich, complex, and multifaceted origins of a people whose ancestors may have been indigenous to the lands they now call home. The dark-skinned aboriginal tribes of America have been subject to historical erasure, their presence overshadowed by the dominant narrative of European conquest and the forced migration of African peoples. Yet, accounts from early European explorers, indigenous oral traditions, and various historical records suggest that dark-skinned populations were present in the Americas for thousands of years before Columbus set foot in the New World. Theories of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact between African civilizations and the indigenous peoples of the Americas further reinforce the idea that African Americans may have ancestral ties that extend far beyond the painful legacy of slavery. This exploration seeks to uncover the hidden history of the dark-skinned Aboriginal tribes of America, examining their cultural practices, historical records, and the possible connections between them and modern African Americans. By doing so, it aims to provide a historically accurate and comprehensive analysis of an often overlooked chapter in American history. The presence of dark-skinned Aboriginal tribes in America has been documented by early explorers, historians, and indigenous oral traditions. Various European accounts from the Age of Exploration describe encounters with dark-skinned indigenous groups who bore striking similarities to African peoples. Spanish and Portuguese explorers, including the famed Christopher Columbus, wrote about encountering people with African-like features in the Caribbean. Similarly, early British and French settlers in North America observe indigenous tribes with dark skin, curly hair, and distinct cultural traditions that bore little resemblance to the well-documented Native American groups of the time. Several ancient civilizations in the Americas have also been suggested to have African influences. The Olmec civilization, one of the earliest and most advanced cultures in Mesoamerica, left behind colossal stone heads that bear distinctly African features. These massive sculptures, with their broad noses and full lips, have fueled speculation about a transatlantic connection between Africa and the pre-Columbian Americas. Some researchers propose that African explorers from the Mande Empire or the ancient kingdoms of West Africa may have reached the Americas centuries before Columbus, establishing contact with indigenous peoples and possibly influencing their societies. Additionally, indigenous oral histories from tribes across North and South America speak of dark-skinned ancestors who were present long before European colonization. The Washitaw Nation, an indigenous group in North America, claims descent from an ancient black population that once inhabited vast regions of the continent. Similar traditions exist among the Yamasee, Choctaw, and other southeastern tribes, many of whom have documented histories of intermarriage and cultural exchange with African peoples long before the transatlantic slave trade began. The Washitaw Nation is one of the most compelling examples of a dark-skinned indigenous group in North America. Historically recognized as one of the oldest indigenous groups in the United States, the Washitaw people have long asserted their ancestral ties to the ancient mound-building civilizations that once flourished along the Mississippi River Valley. Some historians argue that the Washitaw are descendants of the ancient Moors, a black civilization with African roots that established settlements in the Americas long before European contact. In addition to the Washitaw, the Yamasee and other southeastern tribes also had significant populations of dark-skinned members. Historical records indicate that many of these groups were labeled as free blacks or mulattoes by colonial authorities, obscuring their true indigenous identities. Over time, forced assimilation, racial categorization, and legal classifications contributed to the erasure of these aboriginal populations, leading to the widespread assumption that all dark-skinned people in America were of African slave descent. The possibility of African contact with the Americas before Columbus is supported by multiple lines of evidence, including linguistic similarities, cultural parallels, and historical records. West African maritime traditions suggest that African sailors possessed the knowledge and capability to navigate the Atlantic Ocean long before European explorers undertook similar journeys. The Mali Empire, under Emperor Abu Bakr, is said to have launched a massive naval expedition to explore lands beyond the Atlantic in the early 14th century, a century before Columbus's voyage. Further evidence comes from the discovery of African artifacts in pre-Columbian archaeological sites. Carbon-dated inscriptions resembling West African scripts have been found in various locations across the Americas, indicating potential cultural exchanges between African civilizations and indigenous American societies. Additionally, botanical studies suggest that certain crops native to Africa, such as the banana and yam, may have been introduced to the Americas through pre-Columbian transatlantic contact. The erasure of dark-skinned indigenous peoples from historical records can be attributed to a combination of forced assimilation, colonial policies, and racial reclassification. During the colonial period, many dark-skinned Aboriginal Americans were classified as Negroes or freedmen, effectively erasing their indigenous heritage. Laws such as the Indian Removal Act and policies of forced assimilation further contributed to their disappearance from mainstream historical narratives. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the U.S. government imposed strict racial classifications that forced many indigenous groups to identify as either Black or Native American, with little room for acknowledgement of mixed or distinct identities. This legal framework contributed to the loss of cultural heritage among many dark-skinned indigenous communities, as they were often absorbed into African American identities, further reinforcing the misconception that all people of African descent in America arrived through slavery. The history of African Americans is far more complex than the dominant narrative suggests. The existence of dark-skinned Aboriginal tribes in America prior to European colonization challenges conventional understandings of racial and ethnic identity in the United States. Historical records, oral traditions, and archaeological evidence suggest that some African Americans may have ancestral ties to these ancient indigenous groups, rather than solely to enslaved Africans brought through the transatlantic slave trade. Uncovering and acknowledging this hidden history is essential for understanding the true diversity of African American heritage. By revisiting historical sources and giving voice to the narratives of indigenous Black populations, we can gain a more nuanced and accurate understanding of the past. The legacy of these forgotten ancestors continues to shape the cultural and historical identity of African Americans today, serving as a testament to the resilience and endurance of a people whose roots run far deeper than the common historical record acknowledges.